It called me Dad, before we'd ever met. It knew where I kept my medicine, knew I would die if it was found, and it came from the future, a future where I was already dead, and the other man had lost his mind. It didn't come to tell me that story. It came to erase it, even if the price was itself. A snowstorm had swallowed the entire northern forest white. I could barely see the path anymore. Wind cut across my face like ice. Snow packed thick into the white fur of my cloak. The medicine basket behind me knocked against my hip. With every step I sank into the snow. If not for that sound, I would never have left the road back to the village. A sound so small, broken, like a young animal abandoned in the middle of winter. I stopped between the pine trees. My breath dissolved white into the cold wind. Then I saw it. A child sitting beneath a fallen tree. Black wolf ears standing rigid between blood-matted hair. Both small hands clutching the frozen body of a woman long dead. Snow had buried her nearly halfway. The child heard my footsteps and snapped its head up. Blue eyes wide open. The moment it saw me, tears spilled instantly. Dad. Its voice shattered across the snowstorm. It stumbled upright, sinking deep in the snow, then nearly fell forward and clutched my legs. That tiny body, freezing cold, trembling violently. I found you, Dad. My heart stopped. I hadn't even begun to understand. When a wave of alpha pheromones slammed across the forest without warning. Cold wood and iron blood pressed down my spine like frost. Every omega instinct in me nearly locked solid. The child froze too. It spun its head and stared deep into the curtain of snow behind me. Those blue eyes stretched wide with something close to despair. Impossible. Both small hands gripped my cloak tight. They actually found us. The woman was dead. I knew the moment I saw her violet hands beneath the snow, but the child still held on, as if letting go would make everything truly over. Wind screamed through the pines. The child shook so hard its teeth rattled. I crouched down. Can you walk? No answer. Just a face lifting toward mine, eyes red and raw from crying too long. I breathed out a white cloud of cold air, then took off my outer cloak and wrapped it around the child. The moment warmth touched it, that small body curled inward instinctively. Dad. I'm not your dad. Silence for a few seconds, then it pressed its face into the white fur. But you came. Far behind the pines, something had moved in the snow. I looked up immediately, but there was nothing, only wind and a thick white wall of silence. The small wooden cabin shuddered in the night wind. I shut the door. The storm was cut off instantly. The child sat pressed against the fireplace, both arms hugging a thick blanket that nearly swallowed it whole. White steam rose from hair still wet with snow. I set a bowl of soup down in front of it. It stared at me for a long moment before daring to take it. Fingers covered in scratches, layer upon layer of old small cuts. Not the hands of a child raised gently. What's your name? The spoon went still. Wolf ears folded down. I don't remember. I watched it for a few more seconds. Not a lie. More like not daring to remember. The fire cracked softly in the stove. The child suddenly looked up. Aren't you going to eat, Dad? I stopped. Don't call me that. It lowered its head immediately. Very small. Okay. I didn't understand why. But the room suddenly felt too quiet to bear. Midnight. A faint creak of wood pulled me awake. The fire had nearly died. I sat up. The child was standing before the wooden cabinet beside the stove. It reached up on its toes and pulled open the exact left drawer, then took out the brown cough medicine bottle. I frowned. What are you doing? It startled and turned around. You're coughing again, Dad. I said nothing. The child unscrewed the cap with practiced ease, then reached for the honey on the shelf beside it without even looking. How do you know where the medicine is? It went still, fingers tightening around the wooden spoon, then very quietly. I've gotten it for you before. The room fell completely silent. Outside the window, snow kept falling thick. I watched that small back in front of the fire. A cold feeling crept slowly up my spine. The next morning, the entire market was staring at us. A few people stepped back when they saw the wolf ears poking out from under the scarf. Whispers rose through the cold air. Northern Wolf Clan. I heard people have gone missing near the forest lately. Don't let it near the children. The child lowered its head very low, small hand gripping the edge of my cloak tight. I pulled it along faster. Then, a wave of alpha pheromones swept through the market without warning. The air locked solid. An omega nearby went pale and grabbed the wooden stool for support. I stopped too. Cold wood. Iron blood. Heavy. Dangerous. The child beside me suddenly shook hard. The medicine pouch dropped into the snow. Impossible. It pressed in close behind my back. Blue eyes fixed hard on the far end of the snow-covered road. They actually found us. Night fell fast in the northern lands. I locked the last window and turned around. The child was sitting curled up on the bed. Both wolf ears pressed flat against black hair. The oil lamp swayed in the draft. "Who are you afraid of?" No answer. Just hands tightening on the blanket. I stepped closer. "Is it whoever killed her?" Those blue eyes trembled immediately. A very long silence. "They can't find me." "Why?" It pressed its face down. Voice so small, it nearly dissolved into the wind outside. "Because you'll die, Dad." I looked at it. Wanted to ask more. But the child had already pulled the blanket up over most of its face. Only those red-rimmed eyes still showed beneath the pale lamplight. Night settled in. Wind howled around the cabin like animals crying in the deep forest. I was adding wood to the fire when the child suddenly ran and wrapped its arms around my waist from behind. Its body was ice cold. "Dad," voice catching in its throat. "Don't open the door tonight." I looked down at it. "Did you hear something?" It shook its head immediately, but those wolf ears had already snapped straight up in full alert. I looked out the window. Just snow. White. Quiet in a way that felt wrong. The child gripped my clothes tighter. "I don't want everything to happen again." I went still. The fire cracked once, softly, in the stove. Midnight. Footsteps in the snow outside. Slow, heavy, moving straight toward the cabin. My eyes opened the instant I heard it. My hand found the knife under the pillow without thinking. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then silence. No knock, no voice. Only alpha pheromones seeping steadily through the gaps in the wood. The child jolted upright on the bed, face gone completely white. It stared hard toward the door. That smell. Knock, one sound against the snow-dark night. Slow, heavy, like whoever was out there had been standing there for a very long time. The child instantly threw itself off the bed, arms locking around mine. "Don't open it, Dad." Shaking violently. "Please." I gripped the knife and walked to the door. The wooden floor creaked under each step. Alpha pheromone thickening with every breath. My head had started to swim. Every omega instinct screaming to get away. Just as my hand reached the latch, a low voice came from the other side. "I have no intention of hurting anyone." I stopped. That voice was hoarse, like it had walked through the blizzard for days. "A few nights ago." A brief pause. "Did you encounter a wolf child?" My heart clenched. Behind me, the child was clutching my clothes so hard it trembled. The door opened a crack. Snow wind poured in immediately. The man outside stood so tall, he nearly blocked out the lantern light behind him. A black cloak, heavy with white snow, long dark hair whipping in the night wind, and those deep amber eyes, looking straight at me. The moment our eyes met, my heart missed a beat. Something strange passed through me, as if I had stood very close to this person before, a long time ago. His pheromone was extraordinarily dangerous, but his eyes were exhausted in a way that frightened me differently, like someone who had not rested in far too long. That gaze moved slowly past me, to where the child stood frozen behind my back. Then his entire body went rigid. Impossible. The space fell completely still, only the wind outside on the porch. The child stared at the man in the doorway for a few seconds. Then tears began falling one after another. "Papa." Its voice broke entirely. I thought, I'd never see you again. The man didn't move, those amber eyes fixed on the child as if nothing else in the world existed. Then he took one step forward on instinct. I stepped immediately in front of the child. "Stay where you are." The air went taut. Alpha pheromone pressed down by reflex. My head spun instantly, but almost immediately after, he pulled it back, very fast, as if afraid of making me uncomfortable. I tightened my grip on the knife. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. His eyes still rested on the space behind me. Where the child was crying so hard its shoulders shook. After a long moment, his voice came out rough and low. "I'd like to know that myself." The fire burned low. Orange light flickered across the old wooden floor, shifting with every draft that slipped through the door cracks. The man still stood near the entrance. Snow on his cloak hadn't finished melting. Then the child suddenly launched itself off the bed. It ran straight to him and clutched the hem of his black cloak, like if it waited even one more second, the person standing there would disappear. "Don't go." Voice thick and broken from crying. "Please, Papa." The man's hand froze mid-air. A long moment passed before it lowered slowly, but it didn't touch the child. Those amber eyes stayed cold and still in a way that unsettled me, as if even he didn't understand what was happening. I tightened my grip on the knife. "Let it go." The man looked up at me. "I haven't done anything." An alpha showing up in the middle of the night with pheromones strong enough to flatten this entire village. I stepped in front of the child. "Give me one reason to trust you." Outside, the snow wind picked up again. The child still wouldn't release his cloak, like it had been waiting for this moment for far too long. Dawn came. The blizzard had stopped. The whole forest lay white and silent as held breath. The man stood on the wooden porch. His breath dissolved white into the air. I set his bag down on the snow. "You should leave." He didn't answer, just stared at the door behind me for a long moment. The child was standing behind the old curtain, blue eyes flickering between the folds of fabric. "I don't like being watched." My voice came out flat. "And I don't like getting tangled in Wolf Clan trouble." This time he looked at me, eyes very deep, very tired, but still no killing intent. "I just want to know who the child is." "I don't know." "Then why does its pheromones smell like both of us?" My heart stopped. Just for one beat. "Leave the village before anyone notices you." I slammed the door shut. Outside went quiet fast, just wind sliding over the snow-covered roof. That night, I saw wolf tracks beneath the window. Very large, still fresh, still there the next morning. And the day after that, as if something was always standing somewhere out in the forest, watching this cabin. Third morning, I opened the door and found a snow deer lying on the porch, blood not yet fully frozen, white coat dusted with fresh snow. The bite at its throat was so clean it was almost brutal. The child behind me went completely still. It recognized this immediately. So did I. No predator in this region left prey this intact. I dragged the carcass inside before the villagers could see. When I turned to close the door, I noticed a small medicine pouch beside it. Inside were rare northern herbs, the kind only the wolf hunting regiment carried. I held the pouch tight. The child stood very quiet. Then after a moment, very softly, "Papa used to leave things at the door like this." I spun around to look at it, but it had already lowered its head. By nightfall, the child had developed a fever, breath burning hot, sweat soaking through the dark hair at its temples. I changed the warm compress over and over through midnight, but the temperature wouldn't break. Outside, snow wind hammered against the glass. Then, knock, one quiet knock. I cracked the door open. The man stood in the snow outside, dried blood still on his shoulder. He held out a silver medicine vial. "Give it this before dawn. I don't need your help." This kind of fever damages wolf-blooded children's lungs. His voice was very low, especially ones with wolf blood. I was about to close the door. Then behind me, the child broke into a violent coughing fit. My hand on the door went still. Out on the porch, the man hadn't moved. No intention of stepping inside. Midnight. An alarm bell rang from the far end of the village. I was up before it finished. Outside, chaos. People shouting, "Lock your doors!" A monster got into the village. I was still reaching for my cloak when the child grabbed my arm. Blue eyes blown wide with panic. "Don't go." A roar split through the blizzard outside. Deep. Very close. The window rattled hard once. Then everything went silent. Just wind. I pushed the door open a crack and looked out. Far between the snow-covered pines, an enormous dark figure stood in the middle of the creature's remains. Black blood stained the white snow red. Wind tore through long black hair. Then that shadow turned and disappeared slowly into the storm. No one in the village saw him, but I knew who it was. Morning after, villagers gathered at the forest edge. The creature had been torn nearly in two. The smell of blood was thick enough to make breathing difficult. "Northern wolf." A hunter's voice shook. Only they could do something like this. I stood at the back of the crowd. My eyes followed the trail of blood leading deep into the trees. A lot of blood. Whoever killed it hadn't walked away unhurt. That night, I went into the forest with an oil lamp. Snow sank deep under each step. The pines were dark and silent around me. Then I found him. The man sitting with his back against a large tree trunk, his black cloak soaked through with blood on one side. He looked up when I approached, those amber eyes still calm. "Why did you come here?" I set the medicine pouch down in the snow. "I don't want anything dying near my village." I turned to leave immediately after, but my feet stopped. Behind me, his voice came out barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Light snow fell through the afternoon. The child sat beside the window, blanket pulled around it, staring out at the white forest in the distance. I was cutting herbs at the wooden table. "Eat." I pushed the hot soup over. It didn't touch it, just kept looking out through the foggy glass. Papa always does that. My hand stopped. Does what? The child blinked like it had just said something it didn't mean to, then looked down quickly. Every time he gets hurt, Papa disappears somewhere alone. The room went quiet, just the soft crackling of the fire. I looked sideways at the small face bent low. That wasn't how a child talked about a stranger. It sounded like someone who had grown used to something a very long time ago. 3 days later, the blizzard finally stopped completely. I took the child into the forest to gather herbs. Cold sunlight cut through the ice-covered pines, reflecting so white it hurt to look at. The child followed behind me quietly, until it suddenly stopped. I turned around. It was staring hard into the deep forest, face completely drained. "What's wrong?" No answer. Just one small step back. I looked in the same direction. Between the snow-covered trunks, a figure stood very far away, silver-grey cloak, face almost entirely obscured. But what made my spine go cold was the eyes, nothing like a living person's. The figure stood still for a few seconds, then vanished into the snow. The child immediately gripped the edge of my cloak, for the first time since I'd found it. What I saw in its eyes wasn't only fear, it was despair. That night, the wind howled hard around the cabin. I barely slept. The oil lamp burned low on the table. Outside the window, wolf tracks still pressed clearly into the fresh snow. The child was curled up beside the fireplace. But even while sleeping, those wolf ears trembled faintly. Then it started talking in its sleep. Not enough time. I went still. The child's brow creased in sleep. Breathing faster. Have to go north. I stepped closer. Hey! Blue eyes snapped open in the dark. So panicked it took a few seconds before it recognized me. Dad! Breathing came fast and ragged, small hands instinctively gripping my clothes. We have to leave. Why? The child bit its lip hard, like it was fighting something in its own head. Then finally, there's something in the far north that can cure you, Dad. My heart stopped. The fire cracked once in the stove. I stared at the child in front of me. What did you just say? It went immediately silent, like it had just realized what it let slip. Those blue eyes trembled visibly. I only remember it vaguely. I said nothing more, just turned slowly and looked out at the snow beyond the window. Maybe it really was time to leave. Next morning I started packing. Medicine, dried food, animal hide for warmth, all tied tight against my back. The child stood by the door watching me for a long time. Are you really going, Dad? Just for now. I pulled the cloak cord tight. At least before whatever's in that forest finds us. The sky was heavy and suffocating. The northern road was almost completely buried in snow. I pulled the child across the ice-covered wooden bridge when I stopped. Someone was standing at the other end. Black cloak, heavy with white snow. Long hair whipping in the grey, cold wind. The man looked at the pack on my back for a moment. You're leaving the village. That's not your concern. I pulled the child back, but it had already taken half a step forward without thinking. Blue eyes fixed on the old map in the man's hand. Then its whole body went rigid. You know that place too, Papa. For the first time, the man's expression actually changed. What did it just say? The child immediately dropped its head, both hands gripping its cloak tight. Cold wind screamed across the frozen bridge. The man slowly opened the map, an ancient marking at the far north. This ruin was discovered by the regiment years ago. Amber eyes settled on me, but no one has ever dared go deep enough. I stared at the marking for a long time. My fingers found the strap of the medicine pack without meaning to. Why are you showing this to me? The man was quiet for a few seconds, then very softly. I'd like to know that too, to know that. Night fell fast across the empty snowfield. A small fire crackled between a ring of frozen stones. The weak orange glow barely reached the snow around camp, turning it pale yellow. I spread a blanket for the child beneath a large pine. It had already fallen asleep at some point, both hands still gripping the edge of my cloak. Across the fire, the man sat cleaning his black sword. No one spoke, just wind cutting through the trees. A while later, I opened my eyes again. The fire had nearly died. The child was sleeping deeply, but the man was gone. I sat up immediately. Then I saw him, far out at the edge of the snow-covered forest, standing alone in the dark. His black cloak nearly dissolved into the grey-white night. Cold wind threw his long hair back behind him. But what made me stop was that his eyes had never left the forest ahead, as if waiting for something to appear. The hand resting on his sword hilt had never loosened, like a wolf more accustomed to standing guard in a blizzard than sleeping beside others. Midnight, the child started shaking in its sleep, cold sweat soaking through its hair. No. Its voice barely a sound. Don't! I leaned down to wake it, and it jolted upright, blue eyes blown wide with panic. It looked around for a few seconds like it couldn't tell what was real, then suddenly threw off the blanket and ran straight into the snow. Hey! And before I could grab it, it had already thrown its arms around the figure standing guard at the forest edge, small arms locking tight around the snow-covered black cloak, whole body shaking violently. "Papa." The man went rigid. The hand holding the sword tightened slightly. The child pressed its face deeper into his cloak. "Don't leave me behind." The wind between the pines went completely still for a few seconds. I stood frozen behind them. The man looked down at the child in his arms for a long time, then slowly pulled his cloak around the small trembling body, said nothing, just stood there silently, blocking the wind for it. Snow fell very softly through the white pine forest, and for the first time, that scene made me feel like I was the one standing outside. Next morning, the sky hung low and suffocating. The three of us stopped beside a river frozen halfway across. I sat brewing medicine against a large rock. The man stood farther off, checking animal tracks in the snow. The child had dozed off inside its cloak. After a long silence, I spoke. "What do you actually want?" He didn't turn around. Wind swept cold across the frozen surface. "I don't know." "You've been following us since the moment you appeared." "I know." "Then disappear." This time he turned slowly. Those amber eyes settled on the sleeping child. For a long time. "I've tried." His voice was very low. "But every time I get a little ways away, I come back." A strange silence fell across the snow. I gripped the warm medicine cup tighter, because I understood that feeling, that completely irrational sense of familiarity, as if something between the three of us had existed long before we ever met. Afternoon. Snow had stopped falling for the first time in days. The northern road slowly emerged between silver-white pines. I walked in front. The child moved in the middle. The man kept a few meters back. No one said anything, but we held that formation the entire way. When we crossed an icy slope, the child's foot suddenly slipped hard. I hadn't even reached out yet, when an arm caught it first. The man lifted the child up in one clean motion. The child wrapped its arms around his neck by reflex, completely natural, like it had happened countless times before. The man reacted almost on instinct too, one hand at its back, one hand shielding its head from the ice-covered branch beside them. Too familiar, too natural. I stood still for a few seconds. My heart skipped one completely irrational beat. Then I kept walking, face blank. "Put it down." The man looked at me, but did it anyway. The child quietly took my hand again once its feet touched the ground. Only this time, it looked back over its shoulder more than before. The northern town appeared at dusk, snow-covered wooden rooftops packed tight against the black mountain base, kitchen smoke rising into a cold, grey sky. A metal bell rang somewhere in the wind. After days of nothing but snow and forest, the crowd made my head swim slightly. The child pressed close against me the moment we passed through the town gate. Wolf ears hidden under its scarf. The man pulled his hood lower, but his alpha pheromone still made people on the street unconsciously step aside. We stopped at a small inn near the market. The innkeeper went pale the moment she saw him. "You're with the Northern Regiment?" He didn't answer, just set a few coins on the wooden counter. At a table near the window, a few mercenaries immediately dropped their voices. "Heard the regiment is choosing a new commander soon. That one's guaranteed to get it." A genuine monster. I found myself looking toward the man standing by the staircase. Firelight from the hearth fell across his cold face. For the first time, I noticed the black wolf marking engraved on the sword at his hip. Midnight. Pain woke me, my chest burning like something was clenching tight inside. Breathing had become difficult. I pressed my hand to the bed and tried to stand, but my knees gave out immediately. The medicine cup on the table fell and shattered. The sound made the man throw the door open instantly. "Get out." I forced the words out, but he had already caught it. Chaotic pheromones spreading through the small room. Those amber eyes changed immediately. Not desire. Shock. I gripped my collar and tried to force my breathing steady. "Don't come closer." The man stood completely still for a few seconds. Then very slowly, he stepped back. One step. It was the first time I had ever seen him hesitate like that. The pain stretched until nearly dawn. Snow outside reflected cold blue light into the dark room. I sat leaning against the bed, breathing still uneven. The man had stood on the wooden balcony the entire night, never stepped inside again. The child had long since fallen back asleep. I opened the door and stepped out. Cold wind cut straight into my collar. Seen enough. The man didn't turn around. "Your pheromone," he paused very slightly, "is unstable. Snow leopard omegas are all like that." No. Those amber eyes moved slowly to me. "I've seen omegas in heat before. But your body looks more like it's destroying itself." I said nothing. My hand on the railing tightened without meaning to. Below, snow kept falling very slowly through the street. A long time passed before I spoke. "That's why I have to go north." Morning. The inn was packed from early. Hunters, mercenaries, merchants crammed around the large hearth in the main hall. I was buying medicine when I caught a conversation nearby. Heard the ancient ruin under the ice mountains opened again. Some Western mages are heading there too. Someone supposedly even broke a pheromone curse there. My hand went very still. In the corner of the room, the child had also gone quiet and was listening. The man came down the stairs at exactly that moment. His eyes found mine immediately. Neither of us spoke, but we both understood that might be the only lead we had. 2 days later, all three of us left the town. The northern road gradually disappeared into ancient forest. Enormous trunks sheathed in blue ice blocked out what little light remained. The air inside was far colder than anything outside. The child held my hand tight the whole way. Every so often it would glance back over its shoulder, like it was afraid someone was following. The man led from the front, black sword always ready in hand. A forest this quiet was never a good sign. Then he stopped suddenly. Quiet. I pulled the child behind me immediately. A very faint sound came from somewhere in the canopy above, like claws dragging across ice. The ground shook hard. A creature dropped from the tree layer above, body covered in frozen black fur, 4 red eyes burning through the snow. I hadn't even reacted when the man was already in front of us. Crash! The black sword slammed against the creature's claws. Snow exploded white in every direction. The creature let out a shriek that split the air. The child panicked and grabbed my cloak. The man was pushed back half a step. Then alpha pheromones slammed down across the entire forest. The air went cold enough to suffocate. For the first time, I saw his eyes turn completely predatory. Ruthless. Cold. Dangerous enough that even the creature hesitated for one beat. But the moment that pheromone reached me, my chest exploded in pain. My breathing instantly fell apart, like something deep inside my body was being forced out of control. I pressed my hand against the tree behind me, just to stay upright. The man snapped his head around to look at me, those amber eyes, visibly shaken for the first time. "Close your eyes." He said it to the child, then threw himself straight into the blood-red snow ahead. The storm passed and left the entire forest reeking of monster blood. The man sat leaning against a large tree trunk, his black sword stuck at an angle in the snow. Blood ran down his left arm, dropping dark red onto the white ground. The child had fallen asleep inside my cloak. I sat down across from him and opened the medicine pouch. "Give me your hand." The man hesitated slightly, like he hadn't expected me to come back. "I can do it myself. You'll die of cold infection before you finish." I pulled his hand over firmly. The black fabric had torn open to reveal a deep gash along his upper arm. His alpha pheromone drifted faintly beneath the smell of blood, strangely familiar. I frowned and quickly wrapped the bandage around the wound. The man watched me in silence the entire time, You always save people like this? I'm a healer. Even people you don't trust? My hands paused very slightly. Then I pulled the last knot tight. I just don't want anyone else dying in the snow. Cold wind moved through the pines. For the first time since we'd met, neither of us looked away first. Afternoon. Snow reflected the cold sunlight until it hurt to look at. The child sat on a fallen log, holding a cup of warm milk with both small hands. I was checking medicine nearby. The man stood farther off, sharpening his black sword. Keng. The metal rang faintly through the white forest. The child watched both of us for a long time, long enough that I had to look up. What is it? It startled, then immediately looked down. Nothing. But a few seconds later, it was sneaking glances at the man again. For a long time, like it was trying to confirm something. Or more precisely, like it was looking at a scene it had lost a very long time ago. Wind moved through the pines. The man suddenly turned his head at exactly that moment. Their eyes met. The child gripped the warm cup tight. Then very quietly, it smiled. A smile so small it nearly dissolved in the snow wind. Night. All three of us stopped beside a lake frozen completely solid. The surface reflected a black sky thick with cold stars. A small fire burned along the snowy bank, wood crackling very softly. The child was asleep, curled up inside my white cloak. The man sat across from me, firelight moving across his face, light and shadow taking turns. Silence stretched for a long time. Then he spoke unexpectedly. You never ask anything about me. When you want to talk, you'll talk. He watched the fire for a few more seconds. People are usually afraid of me. So am I. Those amber eyes lifted slowly. Then why do you let me stay? Cold wind swept across the frozen lake. I looked at the white ice stretching endlessly ahead. Because the kid wants it. The man said nothing, but this time, the pheromone around him had gone much quieter. Nearly dawn. I woke to a faint trace of pheromone drifting through the wind. Cold wood and snow. Very faint. Very close. I opened my eyes. The man was standing beside the frozen lake far ahead, his black hair thrown back by the night wind through the pale snow. In that moment, my chest ached without warning. A blurred image passed through my mind. That silhouette. That scent. That scene. As if I had stood watching him like this many times before. Somewhere, in a memory that didn't belong to me, I gripped the blanket without thinking. The man suddenly turned his head, those amber eyes looking straight toward me. My heart stopped again. I didn't understand why, but I was starting to feel that the danger wasn't him. It was this feeling of familiarity. The following afternoon, the northern pine forest went suddenly too quiet. No more wind, no more sounds of animals moving. The man stopped immediately. Get back. I pulled the child behind me at once. Then, crash! A beam of silver light struck straight down into the forest. The ground exploded. White snow blasted upward in a thick cloud. A figure appeared through the cold light, silver-grey cloak covering them head to foot. In their hand, a black staff carved with ancient markings. The child went pale instantly. Them. Its voice shook completely. The Time Guardian raised their head slowly, empty eyes settling directly on the child. This child does not belong here. The air across the entire forest dropped cold in an instant. The man drew his sword. Alpha pheromone pressed down hard. Back away from us. The Guardian only tilted their heads slightly. The timeline must be corrected, then vanished. The next moment, the staff was already directly in front of me. I only had time to see the silver light coming, too fast, no way to avoid it, and in that instant, the child threw itself in front of me. Stop! A deep crimson magic circle exploded beneath its feet. Ancient markings spread across the snow. Boom! The silver beam was forced back the way it came. The entire forest shook violently. I stood frozen, staring at the child. Black hair flying in the snow wind, blue eyes blazing bright between ancient red markings. Nothing like a child. More like something that had lived far too long. The Time Guardian went still for the first time. Forbidden magic. Their voice dropped cold. The man instantly grabbed the child and pulled hard. Run! All three of us ran through the ice-covered pine forest. Explosions still echoed behind us. Only when we had fully broken the trail did the man stop beneath a snow cliff. His breathing was still very heavy. The child sat huddled against a boulder, face completely white. The man crouched down in front of it. It was the first time I had seen his eyes shake that visibly. What was that just now? The child said nothing. Where did you learn ancient magic? Both small hands gripped the cloak tight. A long time passed before it shook its head. I don't remember clearly. That's not something a child can use. The man's voice dropped very low. I looked at the child for a few more seconds, then slowly sat down beside it. It's all right. The child looked up at me, eyes trembling very faintly. I straightened the scarf slipping off its shoulder. Don't ever step in front of me like that again. The child bit its lip hard, then very quietly. But I don't want you to die, Dad. The man across from us went visibly still. That night the blizzard returned, a small cave in the mountain barely enough to block the wind. The child slept uneasily, forehead burning hot. I was replacing the cold cloth on its head when the small body suddenly convulsed hard. No, it gripped my clothes tight. That's not right. What's not right? The child opened its eyes, but its gaze was hazy, like it was looking somewhere very far away. The house is gone. Its voice trembled. I remember, but it doesn't match. The man immediately stepped closer. What do you see? The child clutched its head in pain. Fragmented images kept flashing through those trembling blue eyes. Blood, snow, a burning house, someone crying. Then everything shattered. The child broke into sobs for the first time in many days. I can't remember anymore. Dawn. The blizzard finally began to weaken. I woke to a strange cold feeling. The man was standing outside the cave entrance, those amber eyes fixed hard on one spot. I stepped forward, then stopped. The child was standing in the middle of the pale snow. That small body in the moonlight, nearly transparent, not fully gone, but cold light was visibly passing through its shoulder. My heart went ice cold. Hey! The child startled and turned around. In that instant, its body returned to normal immediately, as if nothing had happened, but the man's expression had completely changed. Colder, much heavier than before. The child stood still in the snow, then very slowly lowered its head to avoid both our eyes. 3 days later, the ancient ruin finally appeared among the ice mountains of the far north. Massive black stone pillars rising above the white snow like the remains of a dead civilization. Ancient markings covering every surface of the rock. Pale blue light flowing beneath cracked ice. The air so cold that breath froze into white mist the moment it left your lips. All three of us stood at the foot of the enormous snow-covered steps. No one spoke. Then the child very slowly gripped the edge of my cloak. We're here, its voice barely above a whisper. But this time, what was in its eyes wasn't only fear. It was the feeling of having waited a very long time for this place. Far behind us, a silver-grey cloaked figure stood in the blizzard, watching in silence as the ancient ruin opened once more. The stone gate beneath the ruin opened with a sound heavy enough to suggest it had been sleeping for hundreds of years. Snow dust fell from the dark vaulted ceiling. The man walked ahead, holding a torch. Orange firelight fell across walls covered entirely in ancient markings. The air below was so cold that breath nearly froze the moment it left your lips. The child walked very slowly behind me, as if it had passed through this place before. The corridor stretched deep into the earth. then suddenly opened wide. An enormous library emerged from the darkness. Stone shelves reaching all the way to the vaulted ceiling. Thousands of ancient scrolls lay still under pale blue light, radiating from crystals embedded in the walls. I stood frozen for a few seconds. The man frowned very slightly. This place is still active. Far in the darkness, an ancient mechanism turned slowly, as if this library had been waiting for someone to return. I found the documents on the Snow Leopard clan at the deepest level. The scroll was so old that a hard touch might crumble it entirely. Ancient markings stretched across it beneath the torchlight. Hereditary pheromone disorder. My heart stopped. Each line appeared slowly before my eyes. The Omega body would gradually lose its ability to stabilize pheromone as it aged. First came chest pain, sleeplessness, cold fever. Then, the organs began to fail. I gripped the scroll tight. This was no longer a possibility. It was a sentence written from the moment of birth. The man stood behind me for a long time without speaking. Then he asked quietly, "How long have you known about this?" I looked at the old writing for a few more seconds. My mother died from it. The flame flickered softly in the dark library. No one spoke again. The deepest level of the library sat beneath a frozen lake. The ice surface reflected cold blue light like a mirror. In the center of an ancient circular chamber, a large stone altar appeared beneath layers of deep red markings. The child was the first to read them, the life bond ritual. Its voice barely a whisper. The man stepped closer to the altar, firelight reflecting in those amber eyes. "What is it?" The child was quiet for a few seconds, then slowly said, "If the ritual succeeds, the Omega's pheromone will stabilize completely." My heart clenched slightly. "What's the cost?" This time the child didn't look at me. It looked toward the man. "The alpha who participates will have their life bonds sealed permanently." The air went still. They can no longer belong to the regiment. The flame swayed softly across the man's face. For the first time, he was truly silent for a very long time. That night, I woke in the middle of the ancient library. Pale blue light filled the tall stone shelves. The man wasn't in the resting room. I followed the faint torchlight down the corridor, then stopped. He was standing alone in the middle of a ruined hall. In his hand, a communication device made of black crystal. A distorted voice rang through the cold air. "The entire Northern Regiment is waiting for your return. The incoming commander cannot keep disappearing." I went still behind a stone pillar. "Commander," the man said nothing. The voice on the other side continued. "The succession ritual takes place after the snow moon. You know this well." The crystal went dark. The space returned to silence. The man stood motionless for a long time in the cold blue light, as if even he no longer knew which place he should return to. I sat alone beside the frozen lake until nearly dawn. The solid ice reflected the faint blue light from the stone ceiling above. The child slept deeply inside its cloak. The man still hadn't come back. The words, "Regiment Commander," kept repeating in my head. I understood what the Northern Regiment meant. War, borderlines, winters that stretched for years without return. If he accepted the position, he would leave for a very long time. Perhaps many years. Cold wind swept across the frozen lake. I looked down at the ice reflecting my own face, then suddenly remembered what the child had said. "Because you'll die, Dad." My heart went cold very slowly. For the first time, I was beginning to fear a future I hadn't yet seen. Afternoon. The entire ancient library trembled very slightly. The red markings on the walls flared bright, then cut out. The child stopped mid-step in the corridor. It clutched its head. Breathing instantly fell apart. "Hey!" The moment I touched its shoulder, the child's eyes flew open wide, no longer seeing the library, but somewhere filled entirely with red fire. Screaming, metal clashing, snow soaked in blood. a torn black wolf banner flying above a battlefield, and in the middle of the dead, the man was kneeling in the snow, his black cloak drenched in blood, those amber eyes, empty in a way that frightened me. No. The child shook violently. The vision shattered instantly. It collapsed onto the cold stone floor. I caught that trembling body. The man stepped forward quickly. What did you see? The child only pressed its face down, small fingernails digging white into my cloak. Red snow. Night. I brought medicine to the man standing guard in the northern corridor. Cold wind poured through the cracks in the stone. He was changing the bandage on his shoulder wound. The black fabric slipped down to reveal a silver marking at his collarbone, a black wolf symbol bound in red chains. I stopped immediately, the seal of the incoming commander. The man pulled his clothing back up fast. But it was already too late. The air between us shifted. You're really going back to the regiment? He was quiet for a few seconds. That has always been my responsibility. Even knowing you'll die on that battlefield. Those amber eyes stopped on me immediately. Who told you that? I didn't answer. Just set the medicine down beside him, then turned and left. Behind me, I could still feel his eyes following me for a long time. Midnight. The blizzard returned over the ancient ruin. The entire library shook from wind screaming through the mountain cracks. The child sat curled in the middle of the stone room, both hands gripping tight enough to tremble. The man stood across from it. I sat beside the small fire. No one spoke for a long time. Then the child suddenly said, "I don't belong here." My heart clenched slightly. It lifted its head, blue eyes reflecting the trembling firelight. I came from the future. The wind outside screamed louder. No one cut it off. The child looked down at its own small hands. I lived somewhere, where Dad never smiled anymore. Its eyes moved slowly to the man, and the other father had been dead for a long time. The air in the room dropped cold enough to suffocate. The child talked for nearly the entire night. No crying, just a small hoarse voice in the dying firelight. I sat frozen listening to every word. I had died in the third winter after the war. The pheromone illness had worsened very fast. During that time, the man was at the northern front. By the time he came back, everything was already too late. The child sat hugging its knees. Papa didn't make it to see Dad one last time. The man stood completely still from beginning to end. Those amber eyes no longer wavering, just growing colder with each passing moment. The child gripped its cloak tight. After that, Papa never returned to the regiment. Papa started searching for forbidden magic. And then everything slowly became what it is now. Outside, the blizzard covered the entire mountain range white, like a future with no road back. Impossible! That was the first word the man spoke after a silence that had stretched very long. He stood up abruptly. The stone chair behind him crashed hard to the floor. Alpha Pheromone instantly lost control. Boom! Every torch in the room shuddered violently. I nearly choked on it. The child went pale. Papa, impossible. His voice had gone completely rough, those amber eyes chaotic in a way that frightened me. I have never let anyone die. I know. The child's voice shook. But back then, Papa wasn't there with Dad. Crash! The black sword drove straight down into the stone floor. Cracks spread from beneath his feet. The man stood in the middle of the dark ancient library, shoulders trembling very faintly, like a predator feeling real fear for the very first time. Not fear of war, but fear of losing something he hadn't yet had the chance to hold on to. The ancient library still trembled faintly from the sound of the sword hitting the stone floor. The child stood in the middle of the swaying torchlight, not stepping back, not lowering its head, just looking straight at him. I don't blame you, Papa. The words fell very softly, almost swallowed entirely by the wind slipping through the stone shelves. The man didn't answer. Those amber eyes still carried the aftershock of something that had just broken inside. But deeper, beneath all of that, a very large hollow had been carved open. The child gripped its sleeve tight. Voice lower, even if it happened. I still don't blame you, Papa. The air in the room seemed to thicken. I stood very still behind them, watching his hand clench, very slowly, like he was trying to keep something from breaking further. There are things you hear that you can never pretend you didn't. He knew that, so did I. The light in the ancient library shifted very slightly, not the wind, not the torches going out, just the space becoming, no longer fully belonging to the present. I saw her first, a figure standing among the collapsed shelves, silver-grey fur coat, white hair pinned up high, eyes looking toward the child with something that had no name, not entirely a living person, but not a ghost either, like a piece of memory too heavy to dissolve. The man turned. His eyes met empty air, only I could see her clearly. The child had already been looking straight at that figure, Nanny. Its voice was quiet, but certain. A silence stretched through the swaying torchlight. The figure didn't move closer, just stood there, as if standing there was all she had left to give. I'm the one who raised Papa from when he was small. The child kept speaking, voice steady, but its breathing was no longer calm. She was the only one who knew ancient magic. She helped me use the forbidden book to come back here. It looked down at its own small hands. She was the woman who died the night Papa found me in the blizzard. The man went completely still. Those amber eyes looked toward the empty space he couldn't see, but I could see her looking back at him, looking at the child, with the eyes of someone who had watched both of them grow up. The pale blue light from the crystals in the walls trembled very faintly, as if the space itself was registering the anomaly living inside it. The stone door at the end of the corridor opened with a sound heavy as something that had slept for hundreds of years. Snow dust fell from the dark vaulted ceiling. Inside was an enormous ritual chamber. Ancient rune circles carved across the entire floor, spreading like stone veins, reaching all the way to the pillars that stretched beyond sight. The air here wasn't still, it was breathing. Each footstep made the markings on the floor light up very slowly, as if identifying each person one by one. The child walked ahead, no hesitation, not looking down, as if it had stood here before, only in a different life, with a different ending. The man followed, hand still resting near the sword hilt by reflex. I came last. Beneath my feet, the cold stone pushed through the soles of my shoes. This place didn't feel like it belonged to the same time I was living in. Before the central circle, the man stopped. Rune light reflected across his face, dividing it into patches of light and shadow with no clear border. He didn't step forward, just stood there. One more step would cross the line between the Northern Regiment's commander and the person who had left all of that behind. I watched his hand clench very slowly at his side, not from fear, but from standing before something that couldn't be taken back once crossed. The child looked up at him. No pushing, no words, just a call. Very soft. Papa. One word only, but in this space, it carried more weight than everything said before it. I looked at him. For the first time since meeting this person, I no longer saw the commander the entire Northern Regiment feared. No longer the one who carried pheromones strong enough to crush a forest. Just a person standing before a choice with no map leading back. The space above the rune circle went suddenly dark. Not the torches going out, but something from outside the flow of time casting its shadow down over this place. A crack opened in the air. No shape, no sound, just pressure pushing down over the entire room in a single breath. The runes on the floor blazed into chaos. The child immediately stepped back half a pace. They're here. Its voice didn't shake, but I heard something very old in those words, as if it had said this before, in a time before this one, and it was the only one who still remembered. The man drew his sword, then the silver-grey cloaked figure appeared at the edge of the ritual circle. the Time Guardian. Empty eyes settling directly on the child. This child has used the forbidden book to fracture the timeline. A voice with no tone, no feeling. It must be erased. The nanny's figure appeared again, clearer, more stable, no longer a faded memory standing far away, but a real presence stepping forward, standing right at the edge of the ritual circle, as if she was using every last fragment of her existence to keep this space from collapsing before the ritual could finish. The child saw her. "Nanny." This time its voice was clearer and more pained. "Don't do this." She didn't answer, just looked toward the man, then toward the central rune. Those eyes didn't speak in words, but I understood, counting, each beat of time still remaining. The Time Guardian raised the staff. "You have 10 breaths." Looking straight at the man, step out of the ritual circle. Let the timeline correct itself. Wind from the crack in the space blew down so cold that breath froze in the air before our faces. Or stay, and all of you disappear with the child. The man looked at the staff, looked at the runes blazing in chaos beneath his feet, looked at the child standing in the middle of all of it. That small body, those blue eyes that hadn't looked anywhere but at him. Then he lowered his sword, very slowly. Not because he lost. The sound of metal meeting stone floor rang once, then went silent. He stepped across the rune boundary. One step. The light in the room shifted immediately. Then the second step. He reached up, slowly, and removed the seal from his shoulder. The black wolf symbol bound in red chains, the mark of the Northern Regiment's incoming commander. Set it down on the stone floor. Didn't look back. "I choose this." His voice barely above a whisper. It didn't need to be louder. The entire ritual chamber had already heard. The runes on the floor blazed bright. Not ordinary light, but the light of writing restructuring itself, of a timeline being rewritten from pages thought sealed forever. Ancient symbols rotating in opposite directions, colliding, then merging into something newer, more complete. The space above the ruin cracked open like torn paper. Cold blue light poured down through that tear, filling the entire room. The child stood in the center of the light. Its body began to fade, not suddenly, very slowly, like a candle dissolving in sunlight, piece by piece giving way to the light passing through. The nanny's figure and the Time Guardian both stood at the edge of the room, but neither could enter anymore, as if a new page of the timeline was closing its door in front of them. She looked at the child one last time. Those eyes, for the first time, carried no more weight, only lightness, like someone who had finished what they stayed behind to do. Then she was gone. Silence, very deep, very clean, the kind of silence that only comes after everything most frightening has passed and will not come back. The ruin had stopped trembling, the runes dimmed one by one, like embers going cold after a long night. I opened my eyes. The first breath broke free in the pale light of cold dawn. Someone was holding me, that hand still trembling very faintly, but steady. I looked up. Those amber eyes looking down at me, no longer cold the way they had been before, just looking, as if looking to be certain I was still here. My chest no longer hurt. My breathing no longer fell apart. The pheromone inside my body, that thing that had been quietly unstable for so long, lay completely still for the first time. I didn't understand everything yet, but I knew what had just been corrected wasn't only the timeline. The snow forest outside the ruin appeared in the clear, cold morning light. All three of us stepped out. No one spoke for a long stretch. Snow fell very lightly, the thin snow of late winter, no longer heavy enough to become a storm, just enough to settle in quiet white layers across our shoulders. The child walked in the middle. This time it didn't keep turning its head, didn't look behind like something was chasing it, just walked, slowly, but walked. The man followed one step behind, no longer with his hand near his sword. I stopped in the middle of the snow-covered pine forest, looked at the two of them. For a long moment. "My name is Sael." The man turned to look at me. Those amber eyes rested on my face for one beat. Voryn. Just one word, but in the cold air between the snow-covered trees, it landed very clearly. The child stood between both of them, looking from one to the other. Then very softly, it smiled. The wooden cabin at the edge of the village was still there, door unlocked. The fireplace had long gone out, but the ash beneath was still warm. I started rebuilding the fire while Voryn stood at the doorway, looking into the room, as if he still wasn't sure he was allowed to step inside. The child had already burrowed under the blanket, sitting curled up on the bed, hugging its knees, watching me. I looked back at it, at those black wolf ears folded gently down on either side of its head, those blue eyes watching me with something both exhausted and at peace, the kind of peace that belongs to someone who has just set down something too heavy after a road too long. "Hey," it looked up. "Luca." The child went still. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Then tears began to fall. No sound, just rolling down one by one across a face still trying to hold itself together. As if just hearing that name, the right name, meant everything it had been holding onto was finally allowed to come undone. "You still remembered. I'm the one who gave it, who..." I turned back to the fire, but my hand paused very faintly before it reached the kindling. Behind me, Voryn's voice came, the first time I had heard it without coldness. "Luca." Trying that name in his mouth like something still very new, the child turned to look at him and cried harder. That night, the fire burned until morning. Luca had fallen asleep partway through, lying in the middle of the bed, one hand still gripping the edge of my sleeve, even while sleeping. I sat at the head of the bed. Voryn sat on the other side. Neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly in the stove. Snow falling outside the window, lighter, sparser, like winter was slowly releasing its hold. After a long time, he spoke quietly. "Your pheromone has stabilized." I stopped. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, so naturally, as if he had been calling me that for a very long time, and today was just the first time it came out in words. I know. He was quiet for another beat. It won't hurt anymore. I looked down at Luca sleeping. Its face in sleep looked so much smaller than during the day. Nothing left to carry. Just a child sleeping. It worked. I didn't know who I was saying it to. Voryn didn't answer. But on the other side of the bed, his hand slowly came to rest on that sleeping black hair. So lightly, it barely touched. Snow kept falling outside. This time, not a storm. 3 days later. I noticed first. Luca was sitting beside the window, looking out at the snowy courtyard. Morning sunlight coming through the thin glass, casting pale yellow streaks across its shoulder. And through its hand, very faintly, very clearly, like light passing through thin ice instead of being stopped. My heart went cold very slowly. Luca. It startled and looked back at me, then looked down at its own hand. Not surprised, just quiet for one beat, the kind of quiet that belongs to someone who has known for a long time, but still needs a moment when it actually arrives. I know. Its voice was very calm, calm enough that I didn't know how to respond. The new timeline doesn't need this version of me anymore. It placed its transparent hand against the cold glass. Its breath left a small fog on the window. I just need to stay a little longer. Voryn found out that afternoon. I didn't tell him. He saw it himself. Luca standing on the porch, snow falling through its shoulder instead of settling on the fabric. He stood very still at the doorway for a long time, didn't go in, didn't say anything. That evening, Luca went to find him on its own. I stood behind the half-open door, didn't follow, just listened. "Papa," Then a long silence. I want to say something. The sound of Voryn sitting down. I don't regret it. Luca's voice was very steady. I got to see this. Dad is still here. Papa is still here. One long breath, not the child's. I just wanted this time, for no one to be left alone. Behind the door, I stood very still, hand resting on the wooden frame. Didn't go in, but didn't leave either. Early the next morning, snow had stopped falling for the first time in weeks. The eastern sky was cold and white, the clean white of the very first day after a winter that had gone on too long. Luca stood in the front courtyard, bare feet on the snow, leaving no prints. I stood at the doorway. Voryn stood behind me, not touching, but very close, his pheromone warm and quiet in a way I had never felt from him before. Luca turned to look at us. Those blue eyes, this time with no tears, only light, so much light, spreading from somewhere inside outward, from the tips of its fingers slowly up its arms, its shoulders, across the small face still smiling. "Don't forget my name, Dad." I couldn't answer, just nodded. It looked toward Voryn. "Don't lose your mind this time, Papa." He said nothing, but for the first time, he knelt down in front of it. Not because he lost, but because it was the only thing he still had left to give. "I promise." Luca looked at him for one more beat, then looked back at me, smiled, the most real smile it had ever given, then closed its eyes. The light spread very gently, very warm, like snow dissolving into morning sun, not breaking, not disappearing, only becoming part of something larger, until there was nothing left, just a white courtyard, and two people standing in front of a small wooden cabin, Voryn still kneeling. I looked down at him, then very slowly, sat down beside him, said nothing. Wind moved through very lightly, carrying the smell of snow and something much warmer than snow. That night I couldn't sleep. The cabin was quiet enough to hear snow landing on the wooden roof, each thin layer settling over the last, so light it barely had weight. I sat beside the bed, looking at the spot where Luca used to sit, the left corner of the bed, where it would curl up hugging the blanket and look out the window. Empty. The small blanket still folded neatly the way I had folded it that morning after it stood up for the last time. I didn't open it. Didn't know what I was holding on to. Only knew I wasn't ready to touch it yet. Voryn's footsteps came from the direction of the door. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside me on the wooden floor, back against the bed frame, looking in the same direction I was looking, that empty space. After a long time he spoke. It smiled. I didn't answer right away. At the end, it smiled. "Yeah." My voice came out rougher than I expected. It wasn't afraid. Voryn was quiet. His shoulder touched mine very lightly, and didn't pull away. I didn't move either, just sat like that, both of us looking at a space neither of us wanted to name. Snow still falling outside the window. In the days that followed, the cabin still held a kind of quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of a very specific small space. One both of us knew the exact shape of. I didn't put away the small porcelain cup Luca used to use. It stayed on the kitchen shelf beside the other two cups. Voryn never said anything about it. Only once, while wiping down the shelf, he picked it up, cleaned it carefully, and set it back in exactly the same spot. Nothing added, nothing taken away. That winter passed more slowly than any before it. Voryn stayed. No one announced it. He simply didn't leave, and I didn't ask him to. The cabin began to change in very small ways. An extra pair of large boots appeared by the door. The sound of hammering on the roof some windy mornings. Voryn fixing the leak I had left unattended since last autumn. Some mornings he would wake before me, get the fire going, then knock on my door, never walking in uninvited. I started noticing these things without meaning to, only realized it one morning when he went out later than usual to check the forest traps. And I stood at the window, looking out at the snow-covered road for longer than I thought necessary. Spring came in the sound of water dripping from the snow-thawing wooden roof, each drop falling to the porch, steady, like a clock counting towards something newer. I was drying herbs on the porch when Voryn set a bowl of hot porridge down beside my hand, said nothing, turned back inside. I looked at the porridge, at his back disappearing behind the door, then looked down at my own hand, still holding a bundle of herbs I hadn't put down yet. "Voryn." He stopped, didn't turn around. "Thank you." A very brief pause. Then he continued walking inside, but I saw his shoulders drop slightly, just a little. The first summer night, both of us sat on the porch. The northern sky in summer never went fully dark, just shifted into something very deep blue, filled with cold stars. Voryn sat beside me. The distance between us no longer as far as before, but not quite close enough to call close. I looked up at the sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Not a question. Voryn understood. He looked in the same direction I was looking. "No." His voice was very certain. "Not even once." I was quiet for a beat. The regiment wasn't something I wanted to keep. He said it before I finished asking. The blue light of the summer night sky reflected in those amber eyes. The thing I didn't want to lose. I didn't let myself lose it. Wind moved through the front yard. I didn't say anything more, but this time, when his shoulder touched mine, I didn't move away. That autumn, I was measuring out medicine in the kitchen when Voryn came in, jacket still dusted with the first snow of the season, and set a small bundle of pale purple wildflowers down on the table, the kind that grew on the northern rock faces, not found in this region. I looked at the flowers, looked at him. "Where did you go?" "Into the forest." "Far?" "Far." I looked at the flowers for one more beat. "How long were you gone?" Voryn looked at me, something very faint in those amber eyes. Almost like he found it funny, but he didn't smile. "Not long." He stepped back outside. I stood looking at the pale purple bundle on the old wooden table. My heart beat once in a way that made no sense at all. Then I turned back to measuring medicine, face perfectly composed, but my ears were warm all the way to my neck. Winter came early that year. Snow from the middle of the 10th month, thick and fast. One night during a heavy storm, Voryn pulled me inside while I was still trying to throw a tarp over the herbs drying in the yard. The door closed behind us, both of us standing in the kitchen, still breathing hard from running. Snow melting from my hair dripped down one drop at a time. Voryn looked down at me. I looked up at him. The distance between us, for the first time, was no longer the distance of two strangers learning to exist beside each other. It was the distance of two people who knew exactly what they wanted, but hadn't said it yet. I looked away first. "All the herbs are soaked." "Yeah." "You knocked over 2 bundles." "Yeah." "I have to start drying them again from scratch." "Yeah." I looked back at him. Voryn looked at me, then very slowly. He reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair from my face. His fingers were cold, but where they touched was not. "Sorry about the herbs." I didn't answer, just looked at him for one more beat, then turned and went to get a towel, but this time my ears were warm all the way down to my neck. That night, snow was still falling. I sat beside the fireplace, reading through an old medicine journal. Voryn sat across from me, resharpening the black sword, the faint ring of metal on stone, the only sound in the quiet room. Neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly. Snow tapped against the glass in small, steady beats. After a very long time, without looking up from the journal, I spoke. "How long are you going to stay?" The sharpening stopped. Voryn looked at me. I kept my eyes on the journal, but my hand had stopped turning the page. "Until you asked me to leave." I was quiet, turned the page, then stay. The fire crackled in the stove. Snow kept falling outside, and for the first time since last winter, this cabin no longer felt like it only held one person. The months that followed moved in a way I hadn't expected to get used to, but got used to very quickly. Voryn woke before me in the mornings. In the afternoons I went to gather herbs and he came along. Not because he needed to, but because he didn't like me going into the forest alone. In the evenings, we sat beside the fireplace together, sometimes talking, sometimes not, but never feeling the need to fill the silence. Some nights, I would wake in the middle of the night from the old chest pain, but Voryn's pheromone had stabilized mine enough that the pain only flashed briefly before it dissolved. I never told him about it, but he knew. On those nights, the next morning he always stayed a little closer without explaining why. I never asked. Just let it be. The following spring, the snow melted completely. The northern pine forest began turning green again, branch by branch. The thin, pale green of early spring, not yet full, but already there to see. I stood on the porch looking out. Voryn stood behind me. He placed his hand on my shoulder, not gripping, just resting it there. I didn't turn around, just placed my hand over his. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. The winter after that, snow came later than usual. But when it did, it was white and thick, covering every rooftop, every inch of the front yard, every stretch of the road leading out to the distant pine forest. I sat beside the bed. In my hands was a newborn. So small my two hands nearly held its entire body. Tiny black wolf ears pressed flat against either side of its head. Eyes not yet open. Breathing steady and warm. Voryn sat beside me, very close, his pheromone wrapping around the room in a way that no longer pressed down on anything. Just warm, just still. He looked at the baby for a long time without saying anything. That large hand of his, the hand that had held a sword through too many winters, slowly came to rest over my hands holding the child. Not gripping, just resting. I looked down at the small, sleeping face, those tiny black wolf ears, eyes not yet open, but I knew what color they would be when they opened. I called very softly, "Luca." The baby opened its eyes, pale blue, clear as first snow, looking straight up at me, not recognizing me, but I recognized them. Voryn beside me stopped breathing for one beat. Then very quietly, his voice shaking for the first time I had ever heard, "Luca." Snow fell lightly outside the window. This time, there was nothing left to be afraid of. Voryn gave up the entire regiment, a future that had already been written for him, just to stay beside someone who wasn't even sure they could trust him yet. And Luca, a child who traded its own existence to rewrite the ending for two fathers. No one asked if it wanted to. It simply did. So tell me, who do you think was the bravest in this story? Luca, who chose to disappear, or Voryn, who chose to stay?